I'm here and I have the honor of introducing my friend, but also a friend to every miner in America and the most committed person that I know in this movement for the United Mine Workers is Mr. Cecil Roberts. He is a sixth-generation coal miner from Kanawha County, West Virginia. He has been the president of the United Mine Workers of America since 1995. He was reelected to his fifth full term as the international president in 2014. In fact, he is the second longest standing president of the United Mine Workers of America, next to John L. Lewis. Mr. Roberts is here today on behalf of our nation coal miners, and we have them from all over the nation, and we're so proud that they are here with us today. They have answered the call whenever that call came. Not only in the mining field, but basically most of them are veterans, have fought in the war, so they know the patriotic duty and responsibility they have. When our economy was stagnant, these miners fueled the growth and expansion. They kept their promise to us, and now it's time for us to honor ours. The promise that President Truman made to our country and to our miners. These miners are now facing multiple pressures on their health care, pension benefits as a result of financial crisis and corporate bankruptcies. Despite being well managed, the UMWA 1974 pension plan is now severely underfunded and on the road to insolvency. And the Miners Protection Act, which we have before you, will cure that.
Chairman Hatch and Ranking Member Wyden, I want to thank you on behalf of 90,000 UMWA retirees for having this hearing, but most of all, I think I should express to everyone here that this has been a bipartisan effort on your behalf and Senator Wyden's behalf and many of the people on this committee. I'm not going to start naming names because I think I'd have to call the names of most of the people on this committee who have worked in a bipartisan way to try to save the 1974 pension plan of the United Mine Workers of America. And I think this is a plan that absolutely should be saved. And I'd like to take a moment to express why, but if I could just have 5 seconds of my time to commend the courage of Mrs. Lewis for coming here today. I believe that your husband was a true American hero, and thank you for coming here today. You're an inspiration to all of us. It is obviously a problem of great magnitude across the United States of America as we come here today. As you might notice, I'm kind of a little bit out of my element. This is a long ways from Cabin Creek, West Virginia. Although I've been president for a long time, I get a little overwhelmed every time I come here. Both of my grandfathers died in the coal mines. I never met either one of them. My father was a coal miner, and as the Senator Manchin was so kind to say, that I'm a sixth-generation coal miner. I know many of these people we're talking about. I'm not President Roberts to most of them. I'm just Cecil when they see me. I've had an opportunity to eat dinner in their homes, and we go to rallies together, church together. So this is a very personal thing for those of us in the coal fields. They say everybody in West Virginia knows everybody else. There's a lot of truth to that. So when Sago exploded, you saw outreach across West Virginia, and the same thing at Upper Big Branch. As we come here today, coal miners have made a tremendous sacrifice to this nation, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. As we come here today, there's 107,000 of us have been killed in this nation's coal mines trying to energize this nation so everybody else could have a decent way of life and everybody else's economy could prosper. Another 107,000 of us died choking from pneumoconiosis, and as we're in here today, there's somebody dying right this minute from pneumoconiosis or from injuries they sustained in a coal mine. The United States government has a long history here of being involved in the 1974 pension plan. At the end of World War II, the President of the United States seized the coal industry. A lot of people don't know this part of the story. The first pension plan was not negotiated with the coal industry. It was negotiated with the United States government over at the White House. And it was the White House who said, if you coal miners will go back to work and let the nation prosper after this war, then you'll be rewarded with pensions and health care. That was not the first time that the government was involved in this pension plan. Throughout the 70s and throughout the 90s, the government has stood up and been a part of this pension plan and promising these benefits to miners. I think the most important thing that I could say to you today, members of the committee, it's my belief that there's broad support here to fix this. I want to applaud the two senators from West Virginia for sponsoring this bill. This is a bipartisan bill, not only in the United States Senate, it's a bipartisan bill in the House of Representatives. For one time, we have bipartisanship here, and it is a struggle to try to figure out how we can't move from point A to point B when everybody says this is the solution. The one thing that I would ask you to look at is, if we don't do anything else, this is sometimes reality hits us between the eyes here, and maybe we should talk about that before my time is up. If you go to page 6, there's one of three things that's going to happen here. First of all, Congress can fail to act and we can do nothing, and then the 1974 pension plan is going to go insolvent. The cost to the taxpayers of this country of insolvency is $4.6 billion. I don't think that's a good way to approach this problem. The second thing is to take advantage of MPRA, which has been discussed here today, and the cost of that is $3 billion. If you pass this legislation that's been proposed in a very bipartisan way, the cost of the United States government is $2.2 billion, $1 billion cheaper than any other way to fix this problem. I must submit to the members of this committee that no matter where you come from on this issue, if you're very much concerned about the taxpayers' money, then you should pass this bill. If you're concerned about pensioners, you should pass this bill. If you're concerned about health care, you should pass this bill, because every other way that's been suggested here is pretty bad and it's more costly than any other way to fix this. I must ask for consideration, too, on the fact that there's 21,000 retired miners that are going to lose their health care benefits by the end of this year if Congress doesn't act. By 2020 to 2027, somewhere in that neighborhood, this plan's going to go insolvent, and 90,000 retirees are going to lose their benefits. The one thing I must stress to you, in addition to what I've just said, there's $1 billion a year that flows into the most depressed areas, most hard-hit areas of our economy in Appalachia from the health and retirement funds. If these plans collapse, then we'll lose another $1 billion. We've lost 25,000 jobs in the coal mining industry in the last 3 or 4 years. We've been dealing with bankruptcy after bankruptcy after bankruptcy. We've gotten fewer and fewer people paying into these plans, and more people are at risk of losing their health care as we come here today. I urge this committee to start this process of fixing this problem and passing this legislation on to their colleagues in the United States Senate. This is a desperate time for coal miners. I think the coal miners in this country have been promised these benefits. These coal miners in this country have earned these benefits. These coal miners in this country have sacrificed greatly to this nation so all of us can have a better way of life. And we urge consideration of this, and thank you, and I'll be happy at the proper time to answer any questions that's posed to me.
Mr. Roberts, you mentioned recent increases in employer contribution rates to shore up the funding in the 1974 pension plan, with rates climbing from $2 per hour as recently as 2007 to $6.05 today. Should it become necessary, what is the prospect of further increases in that hourly contribution rate by employers, and how many employers are still contributing to the mine workers plan?
The answer to that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is I think additional increases in the contribution rate are out of the question. As you've just noted, they've gone up 100 and some percent since, I think, 2007 or thereabouts. What has happened is we have had one company go into bankruptcy twice and then go out of business. We had another company in Alabama that went out of business, and another company has come in their place, but they don't pay into the 74 pension plan. They would not do that. We have probably the second or third largest company in the United States, Alpha Natural Resources, that's filed for bankruptcy in the middle of that process now, and they will cease paying into the 1974 pension plan. If you take those three bankruptcies together, it's a 40-some% reduction in contributions. The coal industry has seen a horrific drop in the amount of coal that we use in this country. There's 200 million tons of overcapacity in the United States as we sit here today. The second thing is we've seen a terrible drop in price. So those things working against each other has not caused a recession in coal fields, but it's caused a depression, as Senator Manchin just mentioned. So coal companies, if they asked to pay more, won't, and if they did, they'd be gone.
Very quickly, what is the drop-dead date when Congress needs to act, Mr. Roberts?
Probably tomorrow sometime, which we all know that's not going to happen. But let me paint this picture, if I might. The health care benefits of, as I said, 21,000 people will be lost, in my opinion, by the end of this year. That's number one. If we don't act soon, the benefits of this legislation are not going to be as great as they would be if this law passes this year. If this goes down to a couple of years, the amount of funding provided for in this legislation may have a difficult time funding the 1974 plan, so we may not be able to avoid insolvency. Insolvency, by the way, the one thing that I did not say, well, you know, if you want to hear something scary here, will collapse PBGC. If our 74 plan goes into insolvency, PBGC is required to pick up those benefits, even at the PBGC level. It is estimated, not by me, but by PBGC, that 2 to 3 years down the road, PBGC will collapse. So the question is not just fixing our plan here this morning. The question is, do we want to avoid the 74 pension plan ending up in PBGC, which is going to make things worse for the entire United States?
Thank you. Cecil, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment. We kind of sometimes lump together health and pension benefits. And can you speak to the fact that this is two separate funds, they can't be commingled, and how critically important it is to maintain both of these sets of benefits?
Yeah, well, it's been spoken to here primarily by Mrs. Lewis about people relying on these promises year in, year out. I think it's important to note with respect to this is not something that we consider a handout here. I think she articulated that so well. Miners could have very easily had higher wages, more time off, more vacations, maybe had their own money to help fend off some of this, but they relied on this promise of health care. And the thing to remember about coal miners, they're sicker than the rest of us. As bad as you might think that some other occupations are, you ought to try working underground for 40 years in a very dangerous environment. Most miners suffer from pneumoconiosis. Most miners have had injuries over their lifetime. Their medical bills are higher than the average person across this United States of America of ours. So they relied so heavily on this promise of health care. If you read my testimony, it suggests to folks that they knew upon retirement that they were going to need health care. And they also knew it'd be hard to purchase. So they relied on the promise year in, year out, year in, year out, over a 30 or 40-year career, that the one thing that was going to happen is if they got sick and had a $500,000 health care bill, that it would be paid.
The notion that we would, in effect, be on a revenue stream taking $1 billion out of some of the most economically distressed communities, you know, the ripple effect that would have, and the reliance upon then other taxpayer-supported programs. You want to make one quick?
Oh, I think it's extremely important to speak to that. It's in my testimony, but if you go back and ask yourselves, well, why in the world did the government ever get involved in this process to start with? First of all, at that point in time, coal miners and their union were the most powerful organization in the United States of America, and if John L. Lewis had put coal miners on strike in those days, it would shut down the economy of the country. But they being the most patriotic people in the world coming back from World War II themselves, Lewis didn't want to do that. Harry Truman didn't want that to happen. The Congress didn't want that to happen. So the one thing that Lewis was asking for is a retirement plan and health care for these miners who never had it. So We took the money, I say we, our union took that money, invested it in the coal fields. And how did they invest it in the coal fields? They brought doctors into the coal fields that had never been there before. They built 10 hospitals in the coal fields and never been there before. They brought specialists in. They treated these miners who had lost their limbs and never been walking around on stumps and without arms and without legs, and sent them to places and had artificial arms and legs and put on them. This has been a godsend to the most hard-hit areas of this country. Now what we're suggesting on doing here, let's go back to the way it was in 1944 and 1945. I'm telling you, the domino effect here is going to be, and I think you know this very well, Senator, you spent a lot of time down in Southwest Virginia. You're going to have clinics and hospitals and doctors leave these areas, and people are going to have difficulty finding places to go. The one thing that's happened, the state of West Virginia, just to report here this morning, has lost more citizens than any other state in the union. Why is that? It's the collapse of the coal industry. Now we're talking about taking something, the retirees who want to stay in these coal fields, we're talking about taking their pensions away from them, talking about taking their health care away from them, and talking about taking away the places they go to get this treatment. I just, I'm sorry I get somewhat passionate about it, but I know you feel the same way that I do. You spend time down there talking to these people just like I do. This is a tragedy that's unfolding in this country, and there's something we can do about it here if we all act together.
One thing that hasn't been talked about, Cecil, is how the funding can be used from the Abandoned Mine Land Fund to help fund the Miners Pension Protection Act, which I'm a co-sponsor of, and thank you for your work with our coal miners throughout Eastern Iowa, who, as you say, they're getting hit from all sides. Let's face it. You can call it a war on coal, you can call it a battle on coal, I don't care what you call it. You know, we're losing coal miners every single day, and the retirees are getting hit now because of the pension. So $495 million is what I see currently in the Abandoned Mine Land Fund, and they've been spending less than half of that. Can you talk a little about that?
I think it'd be good to lay just a little foundation here, because the premise of this legislation is to draw from what is already there. This is another role that the government has played in these plans over the years. In '92, legislation was passed and signed by Republican President George Bush that allowed for any miner that retired prior to October 1st, '94 to have their health care guaranteed by the United States government off the interest money of the Abandoned Mine Fund. This law was amended in 2006. It also established a permanent appropriation of $400 and some million. And that theory behind that was that the coal industry was paying this amount of money in taxes on leasing. So there's two funding sources that have been available here since '92 to fund the health care and now we're proposing not to add anything else to that legislation other than to just give us a right to have access to the amount of money that was appropriated on a permanent basis in 2006. So we're not here without a solution to this. And that's the only thing that this legislation is asking to be done. So there's two sources of funding here, but the interest money off of the Abandoned Mines Fund, plus you make a good point, Senator, there is additional money in the Abandoned Mines Fund itself. It has not been used, but we have access, as we gather here today, to the interest money off of that. Plus, we have a permanent appropriations established by the Congress of the United States in 2006 for healthcare purposes. If we extended that to pension purposes, we could fix this problem. That's pretty much what this bill does.
Well, that's a really important point to make, and I thank you for letting us know that there is a solution out there that's, I think, very reasonable.
For the mine workers, the responsibility falls with us in this committee first. I'm so pleased that Senator Hatch is supporting the effort and that Senator Wyden has spoken out repeatedly, as has Senator Casey and Senator Warner and others, and Senator Manchin, saying that this committee should do nothing until it fixes this. This should be the first priority in this committee, to fix the mine workers' pension. We can do it. We know how to do it. It doesn't cost taxpayers a lot. It will not end up with undercutting PBGC, which would be a travesty no matter what state you're from. A number of us have been focused on this issue because of the impact it has on thousands of workers. Walk through what will happen, Mr. President. to PBGC if issues confronting, if this Congress fails, if the leadership in this Congress fails to act, what happens to PBGC?
It's been suggested we use some math here, so let me use some math. I never was too good at that, but let me give it a try. This came up a little bit earlier, but we have access to a letter that was written to Congressman McKinley. I don't know if that's been provided to the committee or not, where PBGC answered a question from Congressman McKinley about this issue. And PBGC said to a representative of the United States Congress, Congressman McKinley, that this would collapse PBGC in 2 to 3 years if indeed our fund went insolvent. So the question really, in some ways here, is whether or not the United States Congress wants PBGC to go insolvent along with our pension plan. I think the answer to that, in a bipartisan way, is no. Mainly because it costs more money, using simple math here, to fix this problem unless we just decide as a government that we'll just completely get out of the pension business. And that's not going to happen, in my opinion. People across the United States will not allow that to happen. There is, as Mrs. Lewis pointed out, a weed of people out there that sometimes gets upset about certain things. And when you start talking about no one having a pension, I think folks in this country are going to get very upset.
We have much to do, but not a lot of time. We're at a crossroads. And Mr. Roberts, as you know, I should say President Roberts, as you know, we have a bill that started with Senator Manchin, Senator Capito, but also working with the ranking member, Senator Wyden, and Senator Warner and Senator Brown and I. So we got a good team on this, but we've got to act. And one of the best ways to convey why we have to act is what this means to these minors and to their families. The benefits are rather modest. They average about $530 a month. And I guess, President Roberts, my one and only question in the interest of time is, could you just tell us what this means to those minors and their families, how it will affect them if we don't act?
Well, the most immediate effect on these minors will be at the end of this year for the 21,000 plus who will lose their health care completely and would have to rely solely on Medicare if they're eligible for Medicare. Remember, they would have to take money out of that $500 and some dollars we're talking about here to pay for Medicare on top of everything else. And we're going to have a reduction immediately to those 21,000 plus people for Medicare. In addition to that, Medicare doesn't pay for everything. We know that. So that pension you're talking about for many of these minors will be gone completely to pay for health care that they were promised during their working lives as a minor. In addition to that, there are 90,000 people that we've talked about, one of which I never mentioned happens to be my 96-year-old mother, who's a widow and still receives a widow's pension from the United Mine Workers Fund. I know literally thousands of these people across this country who are depending on these pensions every month. They go to the mailbox or they go to the post office, and that helps them survive. So the effects on losing these pensions would be dramatic. Now, one thing I think I should say here is some have implied that these promises were too much, too great. That's not the case here, and absolutely not. In 2007, the coal industry and the union negotiated a contract, and at that time, 93% of the benefits in the 74 plan were funded. And the actuary said that we were well on the way to being 100% funded, and something occurred that we couldn't control and no one in Congress can control, and that was the recession. And the people who made those decisions had nothing to do with coal miners, had nothing to do with the 74 pension plan, had nothing to do with any of the people we're talking about here today, but they had to pay the price. And I don't want to get too far out here, but we did bail those folks out, and the folks who had nothing to do with this are paying the consequences for this.